My mother's words still echo in my mind. Just sit there and do not talk. For 3 hours, I watched my family divide our deceased grandmother's estate while I remained silent as instructed. They thought I was the obedient daughter, the one who never questioned authority. But what they did not know was that I had been recording everything. Every lie, every forged document, every stolen heirloom. In those final 10 minutes, I would shatter their perfect plan and expose the truth that would destroy our family forever. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and sweet revenge, I want to know where you are watching from. Are you Team Justice or Team Family Loyalty? Hit that like button if you believe karma always finds a way, and do not forget to subscribe, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you will want to see how this family drama unfolds. My name is Scarlett Morrison, and I am 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, my grandmother passed away after a long battle with cancer. Grandma Rose had always been the heart of our family, the one who kept everyone together despite our differences. She was also incredibly wealthy, having built a successful chain of boutique hotels across the East Coast over 40 years. The reading of her will was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the family law office downtown. I arrived early wearing a simple black dress and carrying nothing but my purse. What no one knew was that hidden inside my purse was a tiny recording device I had purchased online after overhearing a suspicious phone conversation between my mother and my uncle the week before. My mother, Patricia Morrison, had always been the controlling type. She was 55 years old, impeccably dressed, and had a way of making everyone feel small with just a look. My father had passed away when I was 15, leaving my mother to raise me alone, while also managing her real estate business. She had always resented that my grandmother seemed to favor my Uncle Marcus, her younger son, by 3 years. Uncle Marcus arrived with his wife, my Aunt Linda, and their twin sons, my cousins Jake and Ryan. Both boys were in their early 20s and had always been spoiled rotten. They drove expensive cars that their parents bought them and had never worked a day in their lives. Jake was studying business at an expensive private college, while Ryan claimed to be an artist but mostly just lived off his parents' money. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a man in his 60s who had been handling our family's legal affairs for over 20 years. He seemed nervous as we all gathered in the conference room, constantly adjusting his glasses and shuffling through papers. "Before we begin," my mother announced, "I think it would be best if Scarlett just listens today. This is complicated family business, and she does not need to worry about these matters." She looked directly at me with that familiar, stern expression. "Just sit there and do not talk." I nodded obediently, as I had done countless times throughout my life. My mother had trained me well to be seen and not heard, especially when it came to family finances. She had always told me that women in our family should let the men handle the important decisions, even though she herself was a successful businesswoman. Mr. Henderson began reading the will, and immediately something felt wrong. According to the document, my grandmother had left her entire estate to my mother and Uncle Marcus to be divided equally between them. The hotel chain, worth approximately $12 million, would be split 50-50. Her personal belongings, including valuable jewelry and artwork, would also be divided between her 2 children. But there was no mention of me anywhere in the will, not even a small keepsake or personal item. This struck me as extremely odd because my grandmother and I had been very close. I had spent every summer at her house growing up, and she had always told me stories about how I would inherit her favorite pearl necklace someday. As Mr. Henderson continued reading, I noticed my mother and uncle exchanging meaningful glances. They seemed relieved, almost smug. My cousins were practically bouncing in their seats with excitement, probably already planning how they would spend their inheritance. "Are there any questions about the distribution?" Mr. Henderson asked. Actually, yes, I said, breaking my silence despite my mother's warning. I am confused about something. My mother's face darkened. Scarlett, I told you to remain quiet. But this does not make sense, I continued. Grandma Rose always told me that I would inherit her pearl necklace, the one that belonged to her mother. She said it was a family tradition to pass it down to the eldest granddaughter. Uncle Marcus laughed dismissively. Mom was old, Scarlett. She said a lot of things toward the end. You cannot take those conversations seriously. But she was completely lucid when she told me this, I protested. It was only 2 months ago when I visited her in the hospital. The will is clear, my mother said firmly. Everything goes to Marcus and me. That is what Mom wanted. Something in her tone made my blood run cold. There was a finality to her words, as if this conversation had been rehearsed. I looked around the room and realized that everyone except me seemed to know exactly what was in the will before it was read. How did you all know what was in the will already? I asked suspiciously. We did not know anything, Aunt Linda said quickly, but her voice was shaky. Then why does nobody seem surprised? Why are Jake and Ryan already talking about buying new cars? My cousin Jake flushed red. We were just hoping. Okay, is that a crime? I studied their faces carefully. My mother looked angry. Uncle Marcus appeared nervous, and Aunt Linda kept fidgeting with her wedding ring. The twins looked guilty, like children caught stealing cookies. I would like to see the original will, I said to Mr. Henderson. This is the original will, he replied, but he would not meet my eyes. When was it last updated? I pressed. 6 months ago, he answered reluctantly. That is strange, I said slowly. Because 6 months ago, Grandma Rose was in the early stages of dementia according to her medical records. Her doctor had already started discussing power of attorney arrangements. The room fell completely silent. My mother's face had gone pale, and Uncle Marcus was sweating despite the air conditioning. Those medical records are private, my mother snapped. How would you even know about them? Because I was the one who drove her to most of her appointments, I replied. I was the one taking care of her while you were all too busy with your own lives. This was true. While my mother and uncle had visited occasionally, I had been the primary caretaker during my grandmother's final months. I had taken leave from my job as a graphic designer to be with her, and she had confided in me about many things, including her concerns about her family's motivations. This conversation is over, my mother declared, standing up abruptly. The will has been read, and that is the end of it. But I was not ready to let it go. Something was very wrong here, and I was determined to find out what it was. As we left the lawyer's office, I made a mental note to investigate further. My grandmother deserved better than this, and I was going to make sure she got it. That evening, I sat in my small apartment, reviewing everything I had recorded during the will reading. The conversation had been crystal clear, and several things stood out to me as suspicious. First, the way everyone seemed to know the contents of the will before it was read. Second, my mother's immediate shutdown of any questions. Third, Mr. Henderson's nervousness and inability to make eye contact when I asked about the will's authenticity. I decided to start my investigation by visiting my grandmother's house the next morning. My mother had given me a key months ago when I was helping with Grandma Rose's care, and technically no one had asked for it back yet. The house felt eerily quiet as I let myself in through the front door. Everything was exactly as my grandmother had left it, from the family photos on the mantelpiece to her reading glasses on the coffee table. I made my way to her home office, a small room where she had handled all her business affairs. Her desk drawers were unlocked, which surprised me. My grandmother had always been meticulous about security, especially regarding important documents. As I searched through the papers, I found bank statements, insurance policies, and correspondence with various business associates. But there was no copy of her will anywhere. However, I did find something interesting: a business card for a different law firm, Patterson and Associates, with a handwritten note in my grandmother's distinctive writing that said, "Updated will, July 15th. The date was only 4 months ago, well after her dementia diagnosis, according to the will Mr. Henderson had presented. I immediately called the number on the business card. After explaining who I was transferred to Mr. Patterson himself. "Miss Morrison," he said warmly, "I was wondering when I might hear from you. Your grandmother spoke about you often during our meetings." "Meetings?" I asked, confused. I thought Mr. Henderson was handling her legal affairs. She came to us because she was concerned about some irregularities with her previous attorney. She wanted to update her will and make sure certain people could not contest it. My heart started racing. "Can you tell me what was in her updated will?" "I am afraid I cannot discuss specifics over the phone, but I can tell you that you were mentioned prominently. She was very clear about her intentions regarding your inheritance." "Mr. Patterson, I was at a will reading yesterday, and I was not mentioned at all. The will was dated 6 months ago." There was a long pause. "That is impossible," he said finally. "The will we prepared supersedes any previous documents. She specifically came to us because she suspected someone might try to suppress her updated wishes." "Can I come in to see you today?" I asked urgently. "Absolutely. How soon can you be here?" An hour later, I was sitting in Mr. Ted Patterson's office staring at a will that was completely different from the one read the day before. According to this document, my grandmother had left 50% of her estate to me, with the remaining 50% split between my mother and uncle. She had also left specific instructions about her pearl necklace and other family heirlooms going to me. She was very concerned that certain family members might try to hide this will, Mr. Patterson explained. "That is why she gave me explicit instructions to contact you directly if anything happened to her, and you did not reach out within 30 days of her passing." "Why did she wait so long to update her will?" I asked. "She told me she had been watching the family dynamics carefully. She suspected that some relatives were only interested in her money, and that others truly cared about her well-being. She wanted to see who would step up to help her during her illness." I thought about all the times I had driven her to doctor appointments, helped her with grocery shopping, and simply sat with her when she was scared about her diagnosis. Meanwhile, my mother and uncle had made excuses about being too busy, only visiting occasionally, and usually asking about her finances. "She also left you this letter," Mr. Patterson said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands and read, "My dearest Scarlett, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I suspect that your mother and uncle will try to hide my real will and present a fake one instead. I have been watching them carefully, and I believe they have been planning this for months. Your mother has been asking suspicious questions about my assets, and Marcus has been pressuring me to simplify my affairs. I want you to know that you have been the light of my life, especially during these difficult final months. You are the only one who truly cared for me without expecting anything in return. Please fight for what is rightfully yours, and do not let them steal your inheritance. I love you more than words can express. Grandma Rose." Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. My grandmother had known exactly what was going to happen, and she had prepared for it. "What do I need to do?" I asked Mr. Patterson. "We need to file this will with the probate court immediately and challenge the fraudulent will that was presented yesterday. This is a serious matter involving potential forgery and fraud." "Will this destroy my family?" I asked, though I was not sure why I still cared about protecting people who had lied to me. "Scarlett, they were willing to destroy your relationship with them to steal your inheritance. You are not the one breaking up this family." That afternoon, I drove to my mother's house. I needed to confront her directly, and give her a chance to come clean before taking legal action. Maybe there was some explanation I had not considered. I found her in her kitchen, seemingly carefree, as she planned what appeared to be an expensive vacation. Travel brochures for European cruises were spread across the counter. "Mom, we need to talk," I said seriously. "If this is about yesterday, I thought we settled that matter," she replied without looking up from her brochures. "I found Grandma's real will," I said quietly. The color drained from her face, and she finally looked at me directly. "I do not know what you think you found, but the will was read yesterday. End of discussion." "The will that was read yesterday was fake," I said. "Grandma updated her will 4 months ago with a different attorney. She left me 50% of her estate." My mother's mask finally slipped, and I saw pure rage in her eyes. "That ungrateful old woman," she hissed. "After everything I did for her, everything I sacrificed, she was going to give half of everything to you, you who have never accomplished anything meaningful in your life." "So you admit it?" I said, shocked by her sudden honesty. "You knew about the real will." "Of course I knew. She called me gloating about it, saying she was going to reward you for your devotion. It was nauseating. Marcus and I worked for decades building relationships with her business associates, managing her properties when she was too old to handle things herself. And she wanted to hand it all over to her precious granddaughter who held her hand a few times." "You forged a will?" I said, the reality of their betrayal hitting me fully. "We did what we had to do to protect our family's legacy," she said defiantly. "You would have just wasted the money anyway." I stood there staring at the woman who had raised me, wondering how I had never seen this side of her before. She was not just greedy, she was cruel and manipulative. "I am going to expose what you did," I said quietly. "No, you are not," she replied with a cold smile. "Because if you do, I will make sure everyone knows what a vindictive, money-hungry little girl you really are. I will tell them you are lying because you are angry about not being mentioned in the will. Who do you think people will believe, a grieving mother and son, or a bitter granddaughter with no proof?" But she was wrong about one thing. I did have proof, and I was about to use it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day gathering evidence. My first stop was the county recorder's office, where I requested copies of all documents related to my grandmother's estate. What I discovered there made my blood boil. Not only had my mother and uncle forged the will, but they had also been systematically stealing from my grandmother for over a year. Property deeds had been transferred into their names' bank accounts, had been emptied, and valuable jewelry had been removed from her safety deposit box. They had used her dementia diagnosis as cover for their theft, claiming they were helping her manage her affairs. Armed with this information, I returned to Mr. Patterson's office. "This is worse than we thought," he said after reviewing the documents. "This is not just will fraud. This is elder abuse and grand theft. We are talking about felony charges." "What should I do?" I asked. "We need to involve the police immediately. But first, I want you to consider something. Are you prepared for the consequences of this? Your entire family could end up in prison." I thought about my grandmother's letter and her final months of life. While my mother and uncle were stealing from her, she had been worried about paying for her medications. While they were forging legal documents, she had been alone and frightened in the hospital. They had not just stolen money. They had stolen her dignity and peace of mind during her final days. "They made their choices," I said firmly. "Now they have to face the consequences." That afternoon, I met with Detective Sarah Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "These cases are unfortunately more common than people realize," she told me after reviewing my evidence. Adult children stealing from elderly parents happens more often than we would like to admit. What happens now? I asked. We will need you to provide a formal statement, and we will begin investigating the financial irregularities. However, I want to warn you that this process can be emotionally difficult. Are you prepared for your family to potentially retaliate? I had not considered that possibility, but it was too late to back down now. Over the next week, I worked closely with Detective Rodriguez and Mr. Patterson to build our case. We discovered that the theft had begun over 18 months ago, shortly after my grandmother's initial dementia diagnosis. My mother had used her power of attorney to authorize transfers that my grandmother never would have agreed to. The fake will had been created by a paralegal who worked at Mr. Henderson's firm. She had been paid $5,000 by my Uncle Marcus to create the fraudulent document. Mr. Henderson himself seemed to be an unwitting participant, though his negligence in not verifying the document's authenticity was still problematic. During this investigation, I also reached out to my cousin Jake, thinking he might be willing to cooperate if he knew the full extent of his parents' crimes. "Jake, I need to talk to you about something serious," I said when I called him. "If this is about the will thing, I do not want to get involved." He replied immediately. "This is not about the will. This is about your parents stealing from Grandma Rose before she died." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" "They took money from her accounts, transferred property into their names, and sold her jewelry. She was struggling to pay for her medications while they were stealing from her." "That is not possible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Jake, I have bank records. I have property transfers. I have receipts from jewelry stores where your father sold her grandmother's ring collection." Another pause. "How much money are we talking about?" "Over $3 million in the past year alone." "Oh my God," he whispered. "I knew they were helping her with her finances, but I thought they were just organizing things for her." "Will you help me prove what they did?" I asked. I need time to think about this. These are my parents we are talking about." "I understand, but Jake, they committed serious crimes. Grandma Rose died thinking her family did not care about her because they were never around. The truth is, they were too busy stealing from her to spend time with her. Let me talk to Ryan and get back to you," he said finally. 2 days later, Jake called me back. "Ryan and I have been talking, and we want to help," he said. "We found some things in our parents' house that you should probably see." That evening, I met Jake and Ryan at their parents' house. Uncle Marcus and Aunt Linda were out of town, visiting friends, giving us an opportunity to search their home office. What we found was devastating. There were forged signatures on dozens of documents, detailed plans for selling my grandmother's properties, and even email exchanges between my mother and uncle, discussing how to keep me from discovering their scheme. In one particularly damning email my mother had written, "We need to make sure Scarlett stays out of this completely. She is too emotional about Mom, and she might cause problems if she finds out what we are doing. The best strategy is to make her think she was never supposed to inherit anything anyway." "I cannot believe they did this," Ryan said, tears in his eyes. "Grandma Rose was so good to us growing up." "They used our names too," Jake added, pointing to documents that showed transfers made supposedly on behalf of their children. "They forged our signatures to make some of these transactions look legitimate." This meant that my cousins were also victims of their parents' scheme. My mother and uncle had been willing to potentially implicate their own children in their crimes. We spent hours photographing documents and organizing evidence. By the end of the evening, we had proof of forgery, theft, fraud, and conspiracy spanning over 18 months. "What happens to our family now?" Ryan asked as we prepared to leave. "I honestly do not know," I replied. "But Grandma Rose deserves justice, and that is what matters most." The next morning, I delivered all the new evidence to Detective Rodriguez and Mr. Patterson. They were amazed by the extent of the documentation we had uncovered. "This is one of the most well-documented cases of financial elder abuse I have ever seen," Detective Rodriguez said. "Your family members were incredibly careless about leaving evidence behind." "When will they be arrested?" I asked. "We are preparing arrest warrants now. Given the amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the fraud, they will likely face multiple felony charges." "And the will contest. With this evidence, there is no question that your grandmother's real will should be honored," Mr. Patterson assured me. "The fraudulent will is worthless." As I left the police station that day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice would be served, but my family would never be the same. My mother and uncle had chosen money over relationships, and now they would face the consequences of that choice. But I also felt something else: pride. My grandmother had trusted me to fight for the truth, and that is exactly what I was doing. She had seen the goodness in me that others had overlooked, and I was determined to honor her memory by ensuring her final wishes were respected. The hardest part was still ahead of me, though. Soon, the whole world would know what my family had done, and I would have to face their anger and blame. But I was ready for whatever came next. 3 days before the arrest warrants were to be executed, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Jake, and he sounded panicked. "Scarlett, you need to know something," he whispered urgently. "My parents came home early from their trip. They know we were in their office." My heart dropped. "How do they know?" "I made a mistake. I accidentally left one of the file folders slightly out of place, and my dad noticed immediately. He has this obsessive thing about keeping his office exactly organized." "What did you tell them?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. At first, I denied everything, but then my mom started crying and talking about how the family was being torn apart. She said you were trying to destroy us all because you were jealous of our success. "Jake, please tell me you did not believe that." There was a long pause. She showed me the bills for Ryan's college tuition and my art supplies. She said that without Grandma's money, Ryan would have to drop out, and I would never be able to pursue my painting. She said you were being selfish by taking money that could help the whole family. "That money was stolen, Jake. It was never theirs to take." "But what if there was another way to handle this?" he said, his voice pleading. "What if we could work something out privately without involving the police? My parents said they would be willing to give you some money if you just dropped the legal case." I could not believe what I was hearing. "They want to buy my silence." "They are not bad people, Scarlett. They just made some mistakes. Do we really need to destroy the entire family over this?" "Jake, they did not make mistakes. They planned this theft for months. They forged legal documents. They stole from a dying woman." My mom said Grandma Rose was not really aware of what was happening anyway because of her dementia. She said it was not like she was suffering. The manipulation was breathtaking. My mother had managed to convince my cousin that stealing from a dementia patient was somehow merciful. "Jake, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "Your parents are criminals. They are trying to use your love for them to make you complicit in their crimes. Maybe, but they are still my parents. I cannot send them to prison." "What about Ryan? Does he feel the same way?" "Ryan is confused. He does not know what to think. I need to talk to him myself. He does not want to talk to anyone right now. This whole situation has really messed him up." The next morning, I called Detective Rodriguez to warn her that my family might be planning to flee or destroy evidence. "We anticipated this possibility," she said. "We have been monitoring their financial accounts for any suspicious activity. So far, they have not tried to access any large amounts of cash or book travel." "But Jake told them about our evidence gathering. They know we have been in their house." That is concerning, but it actually works in our favor. If they try to destroy evidence, now that becomes an additional charge of obstruction of justice. What about my cousin's Jake seems to be siding with his parents now? Unfortunately, that happens frequently in family financial crime cases. The criminals often manipulate other family members by claiming they are the real victims. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Linda. "Scarlett, honey, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding," she said in her sweetest voice. "Can we meet somewhere and talk about this situation?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, I found not just Aunt Linda, but also my mother waiting for me. "We want to make this right," my mother said as soon as I sat down. "We realize there have been some mistakes made and we want to fix them." "Mistakes?" I repeated. "You call forging a will and stealing millions of dollars mistakes. We were trying to protect the family legacy," Aunt Linda said. "Your grandmother was not thinking clearly toward the end. We were afraid she was going to make decisions that would hurt everyone." "So you decided to make those decisions for her?" "We had to," my mother said. "Scarlett, you have to understand we have been managing her affairs for years. We knew her wishes better than anyone. Her wishes were clearly stated in her real will. She wanted me to inherit 50% of her estate. That will was written when she was not in her right mind," Aunt Linda argued. "A court would never uphold it anyway." "Then why did you feel the need to forge a fake one?" I challenged. They exchanged glances and I realized they had rehearsed this conversation. "Look," my mother said, leaning forward. "We are prepared to offer you $1 million to drop this whole thing. Cash, you can start your own business, buy a house, whatever you want. $1 million out of the $12 million you stole." "We did not steal anything," Aunt Linda said quickly. "We were managing her assets. You sold her jewelry and pocketed the money. We sold some pieces that she never wore anymore to pay for her medical expenses." My mother lied smoothly. I realized that they genuinely believed their own lies at this point. They had convinced themselves that they were the victims and that I was the greedy one. "What about Jake and Ryan?" I asked. "They found evidence of your crimes in your own house." "Those boys are confused," Aunt Linda said dismissively. "Jake feels terrible about going behind our backs. He knows he made a mistake." "He feels terrible because you manipulated him." "We did not manipulate anyone." My mother snapped her mask, slipping slightly. "We simply explained the situation to him properly." "The situation is that you committed multiple felonies." "The situation is that you are trying to destroy your own family for money," Aunt Linda shot back. I looked at these two women, my mother and aunt, and realized that there was no reasoning with them. They had crossed so many moral lines that they could not even see them anymore. "I am not dropping the charges," I said firmly. "Then you are making a very big mistake," my mother said coldly. "We have been part of this community for decades. We have friends, connections, resources. If you try to destroy us, we will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." "What kind of person am I?" I asked. "Ungrateful, vindictive, willing to send your own mother to prison for money." "And what kind of person are you?" I countered. "Willing to steal from your dying mother." "We were protecting her legacy," Aunt Linda practically shouted, causing other coffee shop patrons to stare. "You were protecting your inheritance," I corrected. "There is a difference." I stood up to leave, but my mother grabbed my arm. "Scarlett, please, think about what you are doing. Once you go down this path, there is no coming back. Our family will never recover from this." "You should have thought about that before you decided to forge legal documents," I replied, pulling my arm free. As I walked away, I heard Aunt Linda say to my mother, "I told you we should have handled this differently from the beginning." That evening, Jake called me again. "My parents said you refused their offer," he said. Jake, they offered me stolen money to stay quiet about their theft. How is that a reasonable solution? They said they were willing to give you more than you would have gotten from the original will. The original will was fake, Jake. The real will gave me 50% of everything. But what if they are right about Grandma not being in her right mind when she wrote that will? I realized that Jake was too deep in his parents' manipulation to think clearly. They had convinced him that up was down and black was white. Jake, I am going to ask you one more time. Will you stand up for what is right? I cannot choose between my parents and my cousin, he said finally. But I cannot help you send them to prison either. Then you have made your choice, I said sadly. Scarlett, wait. I hung up the phone. My alliance was crumbling and I was facing my family's fury alone. But I refused to give up. My grandmother was counting on me and I would not let her down. The next morning brought an unexpected development. I was having coffee at home when my doorbell rang. Standing on my doorstep was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. Are you Scarlett Morrison? She asked. Yes, can I help you? My name is Margaret Walsh. I was your grandmother's best friend for over 40 years. I believe we need to talk. I invited her in, curious about what she might know. Rose called me 2 months before she passed away. Margaret began once we were seated. She was very upset about some things she had discovered regarding her finances. What kind of things? I asked. She had been reviewing her bank statements and noticed some irregularities. Money being transferred that she did not authorize, bills being paid for expenses she did not recognize. Did she tell you she suspected my mother and uncle? She did more than suspect. She hired a private investigator to look into it. My eyes widened. A private investigator. His name is David Chen, and he documented everything. Rose wanted to have proof before she confronted anyone. Margaret handed me a business card. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would make sure you got this information. Why did she not tell me about this when she was alive? I asked. She was afraid that if Patricia and Marcus knew she was investigating them, they might try to have her declared incompetent or take more drastic measures to silence her. I called David Chen immediately and arranged to meet him that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, he was waiting with several thick folders. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he said, very thorough in her instructions about how she wanted this information handled. He opened the first folder, revealing photographs, bank records, and detailed timelines of financial transactions. I documented over 2 years of systematic theft, he explained. It began small with occasional transfers of a few $1,000s, but it escalated significantly after your grandmother's dementia diagnosis. Why did it escalate then? I asked. Because they realized they could use her medical condition as cover for larger thefts. They started telling banks and financial institutions that they needed to manage her affairs due to her cognitive decline. He showed me copies of documents where my mother and uncle had claimed my grandmother was no longer capable of making financial decisions, even as they were forging her signature on new authorizations. The most damning evidence is this, he said, pulling out a recording device. Your grandmother asked me to install listening devices in her home office after she suspected someone was going through her personal papers. He pressed play, and I heard my mother's voice clearly. We need to move faster on this. If Mom figures out what we have been doing, we are screwed. The sooner we get everything transferred into our names, the safer we will be. Then, Uncle Marcus. What about Scarlett? She spends a lot of time here. Scarlett does not pay attention to financial matters, my mother replied. She is too emotional and naive to notice anything suspicious. But what if she inherits something and starts asking questions? She will not inherit anything if we handle this correctly. I have already talked to Henderson about updating the will. The recording was devastating. It proved premeditation and conspiracy, and it was time-stamped from 8 months ago. There are over 20 hours of recordings, David explained. Your grandmother documented everything because she wanted to make sure there would be enough evidence to prosecute them fully. She knew she was dying, and she spent her final months gathering evidence to protect me, I said, tears streaming down my face. She loved you very much. She often talked about how you were the only family member who cared about her as a person, not as a source of income. I immediately took this new evidence to Detective Rodriguez and Mr. Patterson. They were astounded by the depth of documentation. This changes everything, Detective Rodriguez said. With these recordings, we have proof of conspiracy dating back almost 2 years. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a calculated long-term scheme. What does this mean for the case? I asked. It means your mother and uncle are looking at serious prison time. Grand theft, elder abuse, conspiracy, fraud, forgery. We are talking about decades in prison. And the private investigator's testimony will hold up in court. Absolutely. He was hired by the victim herself, and everything was documented legally. Mr. Patterson was equally pleased. This evidence makes the will contest a formality. No court could possibly uphold the forged will, given this level of documentation. That evening, I called Margaret Walsh to thank her. Rose would be so proud of you, she told me. She knew this would be difficult, but she believed you had the strength to see it through. I almost gave up when Jake turned against me, I admitted. Children often side with their parents even when their parents are wrong. It is not personal. It felt personal. Of course it did. But remember, you are not fighting for revenge. You are fighting for justice. There is a difference. The next day, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Ryan. Scarlett, I need to tell you something, he said quietly. I have been staying at a friend's house because I could not handle being around my parents anymore. What happened? I asked. They told Jake and me that if we testified against them, they would disown us and cut off all financial support. They said we would be responsible for destroying the family. I am sorry they put that pressure on you. But then I started thinking about all the times Grandma Rose helped me with school projects, or listened to me talk about my problems, or just spent time with me because she wanted to. She never asked for anything in return. She loved you, Ryan. I know she did. And the more I think about what my parents did to her, the more disgusted I become. What are you saying? I am saying I want to help you. I want to testify about what we found in their office. I want to make sure Grandma Rose gets justice. This could destroy your relationship with your parents permanently, I warned. They destroyed that relationship themselves when they chose to be criminals. He replied with a maturity that surprised me. What about Jake? Jake is still conflicted, but I think he is starting to see the truth. It might just take him a little more time. With Ryan back on my side and the private investigator's evidence, I felt confident that justice would finally be served. My grandmother had prepared for every possibility, and her careful planning was about to pay off. The arrests were scheduled for the following Monday. After months of investigation and emotional turmoil, the truth was finally going to come out. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected calm. I had imagined this day would feel dramatic, but instead, it felt like a long-held breath finally being released. Detective Rodriguez called me at 8 a.m. to let me know that the arrest warrants had been executed. Your mother and uncle were taken into custody at their homes this morning, she informed me. They will be arraigned this afternoon. How did they react? I asked. Your uncle seemed shocked, like he genuinely did not believe this day would come. Your mother was defiant. She kept insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that this was all a misunderstanding. By noon, the local news stations were covering the story. Local business owners arrested in elder abuse scheme was the headline that appeared on my phone. The story detailed how Patricia Morrison and Marcus Walsh had systematically stolen from Patricia's elderly mother over a 2-year period, culminating in the forgery of her will. My phone started ringing immediately. Friends, neighbors, and even some reporters wanted to know my side of the story. I decided to give one interview to set the record straight. "This was never about money for me," I told the journalist. "This was about honoring my grandmother's final wishes and making sure she received justice for what was done to her." That afternoon, I attended the arraignment with Mr. Patterson. Seeing my mother and uncle in orange jumpsuits was surreal. They looked smaller, somehow deflated. When my mother saw me in the courtroom, she mouthed the words, "I will never forgive you." I mouthed back, "I love you, but you brought this on yourself." The judge set bail at $500,000 each, which they managed to post by evening. However, their assets were frozen, pending the outcome of the case, so they had to liquidate personal items to make bail. Over the next few weeks, the case gained significant attention. The private investigators' recordings were leaked to the media, and the community was shocked by the calculated nature of the theft. Several of my grandmother's friends came forward with their own stories about suspicious requests for money or property that my mother and uncle had made. Jake finally called me 3 weeks after the arrests. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "You do not owe me anything, Jake." "Yes, I do. I let my parents manipulate me into thinking you were the villain in this situation. I was scared of losing my family, but I ended up betraying the family member who was actually fighting for what was right." "Your parents are still your parents," I said. "I understand why you wanted to protect them. But they were wrong, Scarlett. Really, truly wrong, and what they did to Grandma Rose was unforgivable." Jake testified for the prosecution, as did Ryan. Their testimony about finding the evidence in their parents' home office was crucial to establishing the timeline of the crimes. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The defense tried to argue that my mother and uncle were simply managing my grandmother's affairs and that any irregularities were honest mistakes. However, the recordings made by the private investigator demolished that argument. When the prosecution played the audio of my mother saying, "Scarlett does not pay attention to financial matters. She is too emotional and naive to notice anything suspicious," the jury's faces showed their disgust. The most powerful moment came when Mr. Patterson read my grandmother's letter aloud in court. There was not a dry eye in the courtroom as he shared her words about watching her family's behavior during her illness and her decision to leave the majority of her estate to the granddaughter who had truly cared for her. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. My mother was sentenced to 12 years in prison for her role as the primary organizer of the scheme. Uncle Marcus received 10 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, though most of the stolen money had already been recovered and frozen. 6 months later, I finally moved into my grandmother's house. It felt like coming home. I kept most of her furniture and decorations exactly as she had left them, but I converted her office into a reading room filled with all her favorite books. Ryan enrolled in a public university and took out student loans to pay for his education. He told me it felt good to earn something through his own efforts rather than relying on stolen money. Jake struggled more with the adjustment, but he eventually found work as a freelance graphic designer and began rebuilding his life. The 3 of us became closer than we had ever been before. We had discovered that chosen family could be stronger than blood family, and that integrity mattered more than money. I used part of my inheritance to establish a foundation that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse by family members. We provide free legal consultations, investigation services, and support groups for victims and their families. The foundation is named the Rose Morrison Center for Elder Justice, and it has already helped dozens of families navigate similar situations. Every time we help someone recover stolen assets or expose financial abuse, I think about my grandmother and how proud she would be. My mother and uncle both appealed their convictions, but the appeals were denied. They will likely serve most of their sentences. I have not spoken to my mother since the trial ended, though I do think about her sometimes. I hope that during her time in prison, she will find a way to understand the magnitude of what she did. The most meaningful moment came 1 year after the trial, when I was cleaning out the last of my grandmother's personal effects. Hidden in her jewelry box, I found another letter addressed to me. Scarlett, if you are reading this, then justice has been served and my real will has been honored. I want you to know that everything I did was not just about the money, but about making sure you understood your own worth. You have a good heart and a strong sense of right and wrong. Never let anyone convince you to compromise those qualities for any amount of money or family pressure. You are going to do great things in this world, and I will be watching over you with pride. Love always, Grandma Rose. As I finished telling you this story, I realized that the most important lesson was not about money or inheritance, but about standing up for truth even when it costs you everything familiar. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. I want to know what you think about family loyalty versus doing what is right. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and standing up for justice? Should blood really be thicker than water when family members commit serious crimes? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you have ever faced a similar impossible choice. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own family drama, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about karma, justice, and finding the strength to do what is right, even when it breaks your heart. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the family we are born into.